metallic snap of the bear trap echoed through the Rocky Mountain forest, just as Sophia Grant realized her terrible mistake. But by then, the iron jaws had already closed around her leg, and the scream that tore from her throat sent birds scattering into the gray September sky above Colorado Territory in 1878. Pain like she had never known radiated up from her calf, white-hot and blinding. Sophia fell backward onto the carpet of pine needles, her basket of wild herbs spilling across the forest floor. She could see the cruel teeth of the trap biting through her leather boot, blood already seeping through the worn material. Her vision swam as she tried to breathe through the agony, tried to think past the panic that threatened to overwhelm her completely. She had been so careful, or so she thought. The mining town of Silver Ridge lay 3 miles behind her, nestled in a valley where men clawed silver from the earth and women tried to make homes in rough cabins. Sophia had come west 6 months ago after her father's death in Philadelphia, seeking a new life with her aunt who ran a boarding house for miners. The mountains had seemed so beautiful, so full of promise. Now they felt like a trap themselves, closing in around her as surely as the iron teeth in her leg. Sophia grabbed the trap with both hands and pulled, but it would not budge. The springs were too strong, designed to hold a bear, and her hands were too small, too weak. Blood ran warm down her ankle, soaking into her stocking. She tried again, her fingers slipping on the metal, and a sob caught in her throat. No one knew where she had gone. Her aunt thought she was visiting the general store. It would be hours before anyone started looking for her, and by then she might have bled to death on this lonely mountainside. The sound of heavy footsteps through the underbrush made her freeze. For a moment she thought it might be a bear drawn by the smell of blood, and terror clenched her heart. But then a man stepped through the trees, and Sophia did not know whether to feel relieved or more frightened. He was massive, built like the mountains themselves. Broad shoulders strained against a worn buckskin shirt, and his arms looked thick as tree branches, corded with muscle that spoke of years of hard labor. His hair fell past his shoulders in dark waves, and a beard covered the lower half of his face. He carried a rifle in one hand and a string of rabbits in the other, and his eyes, she saw, were the color of mountain streams, that deep gray blue that held both warmth and cold. Those eyes widened when they landed on her, then dropped immediately to the trap around her leg. "Jesus," he breathed, and his voice was rough, like he did not use it often. He dropped the rabbits and propped his rifle against a tree, then strode toward her with surprising speed for such a large man. "Please," Sophia gasped. "Please help me." "Do not move," he commanded, already kneeling beside her. His hands hovered over the trap, and she could see them shaking slightly. "This is going to hurt like hell, but I need to get this thing open." "It is yours?" she managed through gritted teeth. "Yeah." His jaw clenched, and something that looked like guilt flashed across his weathered face. "Said it 3 days ago. Should have marked it better. Should have put it deeper in." He positioned his hands on either side of the trap. "What I am about to do is going to hurt bad, but it is the only way. I need you to stay still, understand? If you jerk when I open it, you could make the wound worse." Sophia nodded, not trusting her voice. She could feel herself starting to shake, shock setting in. "Look at me," he ordered, and she dragged her eyes up to his face. "Keep looking at me. Not at your leg. At me. What is your name?" Sophia Grant. "I am Wade Brennan. I live up on the North Ridge. You're going to be all right, Sophia, I promise you." The way he said her name, soft and careful, steadied her somehow. On 3. 1, 2, 3. He wrenched the trap open with a strength that seemed superhuman. The relief of the pressure releasing lasted only a split second before new pain flooded in, worse than before, and Sophia screamed. Wade pulled the trap away and tossed it aside. Then his hands were on her leg, gentle despite their size, carefully peeling back the torn leather and wool to examine the wound. "Deep but clean," he muttered. "No bones broken, I think. You're lucky. Unlucky to step in it, but lucky it was not worse." He yanked his bandana from around his neck and tied it tight around her calf above the wound, making her gasp again. "To slow the bleeding, I need to get you somewhere I can treat this properly. My cabin is 1/2 mile that way." He gestured northeast. "Can you walk?" Sophia tried to stand, using a nearby tree for support, but the moment she put weight on her injured leg, it buckled and she would have fallen if Wade had not caught her. His arm went around her waist, solid as iron, and he held her up without apparent effort. All right then, he said. Different plan. Before she could protest, he swept her up into his arms as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. One arm cradled her back, the other hooked under her knees, and she found herself pressed against that broad chest, the buckskin shirt soft under her cheek. Your rifle, she said weakly. Your rabbits. I will come back for them. He started walking, his stride long and sure despite the uneven ground and the burden he carried. Nothing out here worth more than getting you help. Sophia wanted to protest that she could not let him just carry her half a mile through rough terrain, but the truth was she had no choice, and her leg hurt so badly she could barely think. So she held on, one arm around his neck for stability, and tried not to notice the way his muscles shifted beneath her as he walked, the warmth of his body against hers, the surprising gentleness in the way he held her. Why do you live all the way up here? She asked, partly to distract herself from the pain, and partly because the silence felt too intimate. Prefer it to town, he said simply. Too many people down there, too much noise. But do you not get lonely? He was quiet for a moment, his boots crunching through fallen leaves. Sometimes, he admitted. But I was a scout for the army until 3 years ago. Saw enough of people and what they do to each other. Mountains are cleaner, make more sense. Sophia could hear the weight in those words, the things he was not saying. You were in the Indian Wars? Among other things. His arms tightened fractionally around her. Rather not talk about it, if it's all the same to you. I understand. I'm sorry. Nothing for you to be sorry for. He ducked under a low branch, sheltering her head with his shoulder. Why did you come west? You do not sound like you were from these parts. Philadelphia, she confirmed. My father died last spring, pneumonia. After that, there was nothing keeping me there. My Aunt Sarah wrote that she needed help with her boarding house here, and I thought perhaps it would be good to start fresh somewhere new. You miss it? The city? Sophia considered that. I miss my father, but the city itself? No. Everyone there knew me as the girl whose mother died giving birth to her, whose father never remarried, who would likely end up a spinster keeping house for her elderly father until he died too. Which is exactly what happened. Out here, I can be someone different. And who do you want to be? It was such a simple question, but no one had ever asked her before. I do not know yet. I suppose I'm still figuring that out. Wade nodded, as if that made perfect sense. Through the trees ahead, Sophia could see a clearing, and in it sat a cabin that looked like it had grown from the mountain itself. Built from logs still bearing their bark, it was larger than she had expected, with a covered porch and a stone chimney from which no smoke currently rose. A shed stood nearby, and beyond that she could see a small paddock with a sturdy-looking mule. Home, Wade announced, carrying her up the porch steps. He had to duck his head to go through the doorway, and then they were inside, and he was lowering her carefully onto a bed covered with thick furs. The cabin's interior was spare, but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a cooking pot hanging from an iron hook. A rough-hewn table and 2 chairs sat near the single window, and shelves lined the walls, holding supplies and tools. The bed she lay on was tucked in one corner, and she tried not to think about the fact that this was where he slept, that his scent of pine and leather and wood smoke surrounded her. Wade was already moving, lighting a fire in the hearth and setting a kettle of water to heat. From a shelf he pulled down clean cloths, a bottle of whiskey, needle and thread. Sophia's stomach turned at the sight of the needle. "It is bad?" she asked. He came to sit on the edge of the bed, his weight making the ropes beneath the mattress creak. "Bad enough that it needs stitches, but not bad enough that you will lose the leg. I have done this before. I will be as careful as I can." "I trust you," Sophia said, and was surprised to find she meant it. This stranger who had literally carried her out of the woods, there was something about him that made her feel safe despite his intimidating size. Wade met her eyes, and something shifted in his expression, softened. "That's brave of you." He handed her the whiskey bottle. "Drink some of this. It will help with the pain." Sophia had never been much of a drinker, but she took a long swallow and gasped as the liquid burned down her throat. Wade waited until she had taken another drink, then carefully removed her boot. The leather was ruined, soaked with blood, and he cut away her stocking with a knife to expose the wound beneath. It looked worse than she had imagined. The trap's teeth had left deep punctures in a semicircle around her calf, some of them still bleeding sluggishly. Wade cleaned it with remarkable gentleness, using warm water from the kettle and cloths that he tore from what looked like an old shirt. Then he poured whiskey directly into the wounds, and Sophia could not stop the cry that tore from her lips, could not stop the tears that spilled down her cheeks. "I know," Wade murmured. "I know it hurts. You're doing so well. Just a little more." He threaded the needle, and Sophia took another desperate swallow of whiskey, then another. The room was starting to spin pleasantly at the edges, the pain becoming distant. The first pierce of the needle made her gasp, and Wade's free hand came to rest on her uninjured leg, warm and steady. "Talk to me," he said. "Tell me about Philadelphia. Tell me anything." So Sophia talked. She told him about her father's bookshop, about the smell of paper and leather bindings, about reading by the window on rainy afternoons. She told him about her aunt's letters that had painted Silver Ridge as a land of opportunity, though the reality had proven somewhat grimmer. She talked until her words started to slur from the whiskey and the shock, and through it all Wade worked with steady hands, stitching the wounds closed with small, neat stitches that spoke of practice. "There," he said finally, tying off the last thread. "All done. You did real well." He bandaged the leg carefully, wrapping clean cloth around and around. "You need to stay off this for at least a week. Keep it elevated. Keep it clean. I can make a poultice that will help with infection and healing." "A week?" Sophia blinked at him, trying to focus. "But my aunt will worry. I cannot stay here for a week. I will go down to town tomorrow and let her know you are all right. But you cannot walk on that leg, Sophia. If you try, you will tear the stitches and likely make it worse. Infection could set in. You need to rest and heal." The room was definitely spinning now. Sophia felt exhausted beyond measure, drained by pain and fear, and the whiskey warming her blood. "Where will I sleep?" "Right here. I will take the floor." "I cannot take your bed," she protested, but her eyes were already drifting closed. "You can, and you will." She felt him pulling a fur blanket over her, tucking it around her shoulders. "Sleep now. You're safe, I promise." And despite everything, despite the strangeness of the situation and the pain still throbbing in her leg, Sophia believed him. She let herself sink into sleep with the sound of Wade moving quietly around the cabin, the fire crackling in the hearth, and the wind sighing through the pines outside. When she woke, it was to gray morning light filtering through the window and the smell of coffee. Her leg ached with a deep, insistent pain, but it was bearable, nothing like the agony of yesterday. Wade sat at the table, whittling something from a piece of wood, and when he heard her stir, he looked up. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Like I walked into a bear trap," Sophia said, and was rewarded by the faint twitch of his lips that might have been the beginning of a smile. "That would be accurate." He stood and poured coffee into a tin cup, then brought it to her along with a piece of cornbread. "Eat. You need your strength." Sophia struggled to sit up, and Wade helped her, propping her back against the wall and adjusting the pillows beneath her injured leg. His hands were so gentle for someone so large, so rough-looking. She sipped the coffee, which was strong and bitter and exactly what she needed. "You said you would go to town today," she asked. "Later this morning. I want to change your bandages first, make sure there's no sign of infection." The thought of him seeing her bare leg again made Sophia blush, but there was no help for it. She could not reach the wound herself, and besides, he had already seen it yesterday. Wade seemed to sense her discomfort, because he kept his eyes on his work and his touch clinical as he unwrapped the bandage, examined the stitches, and applied a poultice that smelled strongly of herbs. "Looks good," he pronounced. "Healing clean. You were lucky." "If I was lucky, I would not have stepped in the trap at all." "Fair point." He wrapped her leg in fresh bandages. "What were you doing out there anyway? You were miles from town." "Gathering herbs. My aunt suffers from headaches, and I have been learning which plants can help. There's a book at the boarding house about medicinal herbs, and I thought I could make myself useful." Wade grunted. "Useful's good, but you need to be more careful. These mountains are not forgiving of mistakes." "I am learning that." Sophia watched as he cleaned up the soiled bandages, moving with economical efficiency around the cabin. Everything about him spoke of self-sufficiency, of a man who needed no one. Yet here he was, taking care of her. "Why are you doing all this?" He paused, his back to her. It was my trap, my responsibility. You could have just helped me free my leg and sent me on my way. You could not walk. What was I supposed to do, leave you to crawl 3 miles through the mountains? Some men would have. Wade turned to face her, and his expression was hard. Then some men are not worth much. He picked up his rifle from where it leaned against the wall. I will be back by afternoon. Do not try to get up and walk around. You need anything, it can wait until I return. After he left, the cabin felt very quiet. Sophia dozed on and off, waking to add wood to the fire from the pile Wade had thoughtfully stacked within her reach. She studied the cabin in the long hours of his absence, learning things about him from the details. The shelves held not just supplies but books, which surprised her. A Bible, worn from use, a volume of Shakespeare's plays, a book about tracking and wilderness survival. The tools hanging on the walls were well maintained, everything in its place. This was not a man who lived rough out of ignorance or laziness. He had chosen this life deliberately. The sun was slanting low through the window when she finally heard his boots on the porch. Wade came in carrying sacks that he set on the table, then came to check on her immediately. How is the leg? Aching, but bearable. Did you see my aunt? I did. She was worried sick, but I assured her you were all right and being taken care of. Told her what happened. She wanted to come up here herself, but I discouraged it. The path is not easy. He pulled items from the sacks. She sent food, seemed to think I could not feed you properly. Sophia could not help but smile. That sounds like Aunt Sarah. She also sent a dress and other things you might need. He handed her a bundle wrapped in paper, then politely turned away while she examined the contents. Her aunt had included not just a dress but a nightgown, undergarments, a hairbrush, and even a bar of rose-scented soap. Bless her. The whole town is talking about it, Wade said, his back still turned. The girl who walked into a bear trap and got rescued by the mountain man. You will be famous when you get back. Oh, wonderful, Sophia muttered. Just what I wanted, more attention. That almost smile flickered across Wade's face again. I also brought supplies for dinner. You must be tired of cornbread. He cooked venison stew in the pot over the fire, and the smell made Sophia's stomach growl. When it was ready, Wade brought her a bowl and then sat at the table with his own, and they ate in companionable silence. The stew was simple but good, flavored with wild onions and herbs. You're a decent cook, Sophia observed. A man learns when he lives alone, either that or eat poorly. How long have you been up here? On your own, I mean. 3 years, since I left the army. He soaked up the last of his stew with cornbread. Built this cabin myself that first year. It was rough going at times, but I prefer it to living in town. Do you ever get scared? Being out here alone with bears and wolves and who knows what else? Wade considered that. No, animals are predictable. You learn their ways, respect them, and mostly they leave you alone. It is people who are truly dangerous. People can be cruel in ways animals never are. There was something dark in his voice, some old pain, and Sophia wanted to ask but did not feel she had the right. Instead, she said, "Tell me about being a scout, if you do not mind talking about it." He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. I joined the army when I was 18. Too young and too stupid to know better. They made me a scout because I grew up in the mountains of Tennessee and knew how to track, how to move quiet. I was good at it. His jaw tightened. Good at things I am not proud of now. The Indian Wars? Among other things, I saw things, did things that I cannot take back. When my enlistment was up, I came here, as far from all that as I could get. He looked at her then, his eyes shadowed. That is why I live up here, Sophia. Not because I do not like people, but because I do not trust myself around them, because I needed to remember how to be something other than a weapon. Sophia's heart ached at the rawness in his voice. You saved me. Huh, she said softly. You have been nothing but kind. That is who you are now. Maybe. He stood abruptly and took their empty bowls to the wash basin. You should rest. I will sleep on the porch tonight. Give you privacy. You do not have to do that. The floor is fine. The porch is fine too. His tone brooked no argument. Sleep, Sophia. Let yourself heal. Over the following days, they fell into a rhythm. Wade would check her leg each morning and night, changing bandages and applying fresh poultice. The wound was healing well, the stitches holding clean, but he remained firm that she must stay off her feet. During the days while Wade worked around the cabin or went to check his trap lines, Sophia read from his small collection of books or worked on mending his shirts, which had accumulated quite a few tears and missing buttons. She could not stand, but she could sew, and it felt good to be useful. Wade brought her wildflowers one afternoon, a small bunch of late-blooming columbines, and set them in a tin cup near the bed without explanation or meeting her eyes. Sophia stared at them, at the delicate blue and white petals, and felt something warm unfurl in her chest. In the evenings they talked. Wade was not a naturally talkative man, but Sophia found she had a knack for drawing him out, for finding the topics that loosened his tongue. He told her about tracking elk through the high country, about the mule named Jasper, who was smarter than most people, about the winter he spent snowed in for 2 months with only books for company. She told him about Philadelphia's streets at Christmas, about her father teaching her to read Latin, about the loneliness of being the only child in a quiet house. "You never wanted to marry?" Wade asked one evening, whittling by firelight while Sophia sat up in bed, her leg propped on pillows. "Men in Philadelphia did not want me. I was too bookish, too plain, and I had no money. My father's shop barely kept us fed." She watched the way his hands moved, sure and steady on the wood. "What are you making?" "A bird. A wren, I think." He held it up, and she could see it was taking shape, delicate despite his large hands. "And you are not plain." Sophia felt her cheeks heat. "You're kind to say so." "I'm not kind. I do not say things I do not mean." His eyes met hers across the firelight. "You have a face that's interesting, thoughtful, pretty in a way that lasts, not the kind that fades after a few years." Her blush deepened. "I do not know what to say to that." "You do not have to say anything." He returned his attention to the carving. "I just wanted you to know. Those men in Philadelphia were fools." The silence that followed was charged with something Sophia could not quite name, something that made her pulse quicken. To cover her confusion, she said, "What about you? You never wanted a wife?" "Wanted is complicated. I figured no woman would want the life I lead. And after the army, after everything I had done, I did not feel I had the right to ask anyone to tie their life to mine." "That seems like a lonely way to think." "Maybe, but it seemed right at the time." He blew wood shavings from the bird, examining his work. "Lately, though, I've been wondering if I was wrong. If maybe I was just afraid." "Afraid of what?" Wade was quiet for a long moment. Of caring about someone again, of having something to lose. Sophia understood that fear. She had felt it herself after her father died, the sense that loving people only opened you to the devastation of losing them. But sitting here in this cabin, watching firelight play across Wade's features, she thought maybe some things were worth the risk. By the 8th day, Sophia could put Wade on her leg again, though it still ached, and she had to move carefully. Wade fashioned her a walking stick from a sturdy branch, and she took slow turns around the cabin, rebuilding her strength. The stitches were healing well, and Wade said he could likely remove them in a few more days. "Then I suppose I should go back to town," Sophia said, trying to keep her voice neutral. Wade's expression shuddered. "I suppose so. Your aunt must miss you." "Yes." Sophia did not want to leave. The realization surprised her with its intensity. She had been here barely over a week, but the cabin felt more like home than the boarding house ever had. Or perhaps it was not the cabin at all, but the man who lived in it. That night, Sophia woke to the sound of Wade shouting. He was on the porch where he had been sleeping, and his voice was hoarse with terror, words she could not make out. She struggled up from the bed, grabbing her walking stick, and limped to the door. Wade was tangled in his blankets, thrashing, clearly caught in the grip of a nightmare. Sophia knelt beside him, awkward with her injured leg, and shook his shoulder. "Wade, Wade, wake up! You are dreaming." His eyes flew open, wild and unseeing, and his hand shot out to grab her wrist. For a moment she was frightened by the strength of his grip, by the blankness in his gaze. Then recognition flooded back, and he released her immediately, scrambling backward. "Jesus, did I hurt you?" His voice was ragged. "No, I'm fine. You were having a nightmare." He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. "You should not have woken me. I could have hurt you without meaning to." But you did not. Sophia shifted to sit beside him, her back against the cabin wall. Do you have them often? The nightmares? Most nights. He lowered his hands, and even in the darkness she could see the exhaustion in his face. Why I sleep out here. Did not want to frighten you. What do you dream about? The war. Things I saw. Things I did. His voice was hollow. People I could not save. Sophia reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. His hand dwarfed hers, rough with calluses, but he held on like she was an anchor. They sat like that in the darkness, listening to the wind in the pines and the distant call of an owl. My father used to have nightmares after my mother died, Sophia said quietly. He would wake up calling her name. I would make him tea and sit with him until he felt better. He said having someone there helped. What happened to your mother, if you do not mind my asking? She died giving birth to me. My father never really forgave himself, even though it was not his fault. He never remarried because he said no one could replace her. Sophia leaned her head against Wade's shoulder. I think he was wrong about that. I think people can love again after loss. I think they should. Wade was very still. Sophia. Yes? I do not want you to go back to town. Her heart stuttered. What? I know I have no right to ask. I know we have only known each other a week, but I do not want you to leave. He turned to face her, and his eyes were intense even in the darkness. These past days having you here, it has been like waking up from a long sleep. The cabin does not feel empty anymore. I do not feel empty anymore. I do not want to leave either, Sophia whispered. Wade cupped her face with one large hand, his thumb brushing her cheek. You understand what you would be choosing? A life in the mountains, far from town, with a man who has nightmares and a dark past. I understand I would be choosing a life with a man who carried me 3 miles when I was hurt, who nursed me back to health, who reads Shakespeare and carves birds and makes me feel safe. The rest we can figure out together. Wade kissed her then, softly at first, almost hesitant, as if he feared she might pull away. But Sophia leaned into him, her hand coming up to tangle in his hair, and the kiss deepened. He tasted like pine and possibility, and Sophia felt like she was finally home. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Wade rested his forehead against hers. I'm going to do this properly. I'm going to court you, ask your aunt's permission, all of it. I want to marry you, Sophia Grant, if you will have me. I will have you, Wade Brennan. I absolutely will. They sat together on the porch until dawn painted the mountains pink and gold, talking about the future they would build together. Wade would take her back to town in a few days, once her leg was fully healed, and he would speak to her aunt. They would be married at the church in Silver Ridge, modest but proper. Then she would come back to the mountains with him as his wife. We could expand the cabin, Wade said, his arm around her shoulders. Add another room, maybe 2, and I could build a proper chicken coop. You could have chickens if you wanted. I would like chickens, Sophia said, smiling, and a garden in the spring. We could grow vegetables, herbs for medicine. And I will teach you to track, to move quiet in the forest, so you can come with me sometimes, see the mountains the way I see them. As long as you teach me to spot bear traps first? Wade laughed, an actual laugh, deep and genuine, and Sophia thought she had never heard a more wonderful sound. True to his word, Wade took Sophia back to town 3 days later, after he had removed her stitches and pronounced the wound healed enough for travel. They rode down the mountain together on Jasper, Sophia sitting in front of Wade on the mule, his arms around her to hold the reins. It felt right, being surrounded by him like this, safe in his embrace. Silver Ridge looked smaller than Sophia remembered, rougher, the buildings worn by weather and hard use. But the people who came out to greet them were genuine in their relief to see her safely returned. Her Aunt Sarah cried and hugged her fiercely, scolding her for being careless while simultaneously thanking Wade profusely for saving her life. That evening, after Sophia had bathed and changed and reassured her aunt a dozen times that she was truly all right, Wade came to the boarding house in his cleanest shirt, his hair tied back, and asked to speak with Sarah privately. Sophia waited in the kitchen, her heart pounding, while voices murmured in the parlor. When the door opened, her aunt's eyes were red, but she was smiling. He says he wants to marry you, says you have already agreed. I have, Sophia confirmed. Sarah looked at her niece for a long moment. You're certain? He's not like the men you knew back east. This will be a hard life, Sophia. I am certain. I love him, Aunt Sarah. I know it has been fast, but I love him. Her aunt sighed and pulled her into a hug. Then you have my blessing. God knows that man looks at you like you hung the moon. Just promise me you will visit sometimes. Do not disappear into those mountains forever. I promise. They were married 3 weeks later in the small clapboard church that served Silver Ridge and the surrounding area. Sophia wore a dress of pale blue wool that her aunt had helped her sew, and Wade wore a suit borrowed from the town's undertaker, the only man in Silver Ridge large enough that his clothes might fit Wade's broad shoulders. The ceremony was simple, attended by the boarding house residents and a handful of townspeople who had heard the romantic story of the mountain man and the girl he had saved. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Wade kissed Sophia with a tenderness that made her aunt dab at her eyes, and the small congregation clapped. Afterward, there was cake and coffee at the boarding house, and people came to wish them well and offer advice and exclaim over how the whole thing was like something from a storybook. As the sun began to set, Wade looked at Sophia, a question in his eyes. She nodded, and he announced to the gathered guests that they would be heading home before dark. There were knowing smiles and a few ribald jokes that made Sophia blush, but her aunt simply hugged her tight and whispered, "Be happy, sweetheart. You deserve it." The ride up the mountain was quiet, both of them tired from the day but content. When the cabin came into view, Sophia felt a swell of joy. This was home now. This was where her new life would begin. Wade helped her down from Jasper and then surprised her by sweeping her up into his arms again, carrying her over the threshold the way bridegrooms did. The cabin was warm, a fire already laid in the hearth from the morning, and someone, probably her aunt's doing, had left a basket of food on the table. "Happy?" Wade asked, setting her down gently. "So happy," Sophia confirmed, reaching up to frame his face with her hands. "I love you, Wade Brennan." "I love you, Sophia Brennan." He said her new name like a prayer. "I will spend every day of my life trying to be worthy of you." "You already are." They made love that night with the fire crackling and the wind singing through the pines, learning the shape of each other, the sounds of pleasure, and the rhythm of two becoming one. Wade was so gentle despite his size, so careful of her still healing leg, worshiping her body with his hands and mouth until she cried out his name into the darkness. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the firs, Sophia's head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "No nightmares tonight," Wade murmured into her hair. "How do you know?" "Because I am not asleep, and even if I were, how could I have nightmares when I am holding my dream?" Sophia smiled against his skin. "That was almost poetic, Mr. Brennan. I have my moments." The days settled into a rhythm that felt both new and ancient, as if they had been doing this dance forever. Wade taught Sophia to track deer through the forest, showing her how to read the signs of their passage in bent grass and disturbed earth. She taught him to make proper bread, laughing at his first clumsy attempts at kneading dough. Together they worked on expanding the cabin, Wade doing the heavy labor of cutting and hauling logs while Sophia planned the layout and helped where she could. Winter came early that year, snow falling in thick drifts by late October. They spent the long evenings by the fire, Wade carving intricate figures from wood, while Sophia sewed or read aloud from his books. On the nights when the nightmares still came, she would wake him gently and hold him until the shadows receded, and gradually they became less frequent. Christmas found them snowed in completely, the world beyond the cabin a wonderland of white. Sophia made a feast from their stored supplies, roasting wild turkey that Wade had brought down and baking bread, and even managing a rough approximation of the mince pies her father used to love. Wade presented her with a carving he had been working on for weeks, a perfect rendering of a wren in mid-flight, so delicate it seemed it might take wing at any moment. "It is beautiful," Sophia breathed, turning it over in her hands. "It is you," Wade said, "small but brave, fragile-looking but stronger than anyone expects." She kissed him then, deeply, and they did not make it back to the table for quite some time. Spring brought a thaw, and with it, new life. Sophia planted her garden, coaxing seeds into the mountain soil, while Wade built the chicken coop he had promised. They acquired 6 hens from a farmer in the valley, and Sophia delighted in collecting eggs each morning. She also discovered she had a talent for healing, using the knowledge from her herb book to treat minor ailments for the few trappers and prospectors who occasionally made their way to the cabin seeking Wade's advice or assistance. It was in late spring that Sophia realized she had not had her monthly courses in some time. She waited to be sure, counting the weeks, before she told Wade one evening after supper. "I think I am with child," she said simply. Wade froze, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. "You think?" "I'm fairly certain. All the signs are there." He set down the cup very carefully, then came around the table to kneel in front of where she sat. His hands settled on her waist, large and warm. "A baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby. Are you pleased?" "Pleased," he laughed, that beautiful laugh she had grown to love. "Sophia, I am terrified and thrilled and so happy I do not have words for it." He pressed his face against her belly. "A baby. Our baby." They told her aunt on their next trip to town, and Sarah cried with joy and immediately began planning, insisting that Sophia must come down to the boarding house when her time came, that she could not possibly give birth up in the mountains with only Wade for help. But Sophia was firm. This was their home, and this was where their child would be born. They would manage. As summer wore on and Sophia's belly swelled, Wade became almost comically protective. He barely let her lift anything heavy, fussed over her constantly, made sure she was eating enough and resting enough and staying healthy. Sophia tolerated his hovering with good humor, knowing it came from love and perhaps a little from fear, from the knowledge that childbirth could be dangerous, that he could lose her the way she had lost her mother. "I'm going to be fine," she assured him one evening, taking his hand and placing it on her belly where the baby was kicking vigorously. "Feel that? That is a strong, healthy baby, and I am strong too. We are going to be fine." Wade nodded, but she could see the worry in his eyes. So she made him talk about his fears, drew them out into the light where they could be examined and addressed. They made plans, discussing what they would do if complications arose, how quickly Wade could ride to town for the doctor if needed. Having a plan seemed to ease his mind somewhat. The baby came in early September, almost exactly a year after Sophia had walked into that bear trap and changed both their lives forever. The labor was long and hard, lasting through the night and into the next day, and there were moments when Sophia understood her father's fear, understood how women died doing this. But Wade was there through all of it, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, encouraging her with a steady stream of words. "You can do this. You are the strongest person I know. Breathe, that is it. You are doing so well." When the baby finally came, arriving in a rush with a lusty cry that filled the cabin, Wade caught his son in shaking hands and stared down at the tiny, red-faced creature with an expression of absolute awe. "A boy," he said hoarsely. "Sophia, we have a son." They named him Samuel after Sophia's father, and Wade carved him a mobile of birds that hung over the cradle he had built. Samuel had his father's dark hair and his mother's gray eyes, and he grew strong and healthy on mountain air and his mother's milk. Being parents transformed them in ways both expected and surprising. Wade, who had thought himself too damaged to be a good father, proved gentle and patient with his son, singing old Tennessee songs in his rough voice to lull the baby to sleep. Sophia, who had worried she might not know how to be a mother having barely known her own, found that love came naturally, fierce and protective and all-consuming. The seasons turned again, bringing another winter, another spring. Samuel grew from an infant to a toddler, sturdy and adventurous, already trying to follow his father around the property. Sophia's garden flourished, and she had begun trading her medicinal tinctures and salves in town, building a small reputation as a healer. Wade's nightmares had become rare, only coming now in times of great stress or on the anniversary of old traumas. On their second wedding anniversary, Wade took Sophia up to a high meadow he had discovered, a place where wildflowers grew in riotous profusion and you could see for miles across the mountains. They had left Samuel with Aunt Sarah for the night, a rare moment of being just the two of them. "Do you ever regret it?" Wade asked, lying in the grass beside her, their fingers intertwined. "Giving up town life? Living up here in the wilderness?" Sophia turned her head to look at him, this man who had saved her life, and then given her a new one. Not for a single moment. Do you regret setting that bear trap? He laughed. Best mistake I ever made. He rolled over to kiss her, sweet and lingering. I love you, Sophia Brennan, more than I thought I could love anything. I love you too. Always. 3 years later, they had a daughter, Emily, who came into the world with far less drama than her brother, arriving in the quiet hours of early morning as if she did not want to be any trouble. She had Sophia's lighter hair and Wade's blue-gray eyes, and she was his complete downfall from the moment he held her. Samuel, now 4, was initially suspicious of this tiny creature who took up so much of his mother's attention, but he quickly became fiercely protective of his little sister. The cabin had grown over the years, now with 2 additional rooms and a proper covered porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sun set over the mountains. The garden was extensive, providing vegetables throughout the summer and stores for winter. The chicken coop had expanded, and they had added a milk cow named Bessie and a second mule to help with the heavier work. Sophia had become known throughout the region as the healing woman of the mountains, and people would make the trek up to the cabin seeking her help with everything from infection to childbirth. Wade had built her a small still room where she could prepare her medicines, lined with shelves of dried herbs and bottles of tinctures. Wade himself had found a kind of peace in the mountains, his past not forgotten but integrated into who he had become. He still worked as a guide occasionally, leading hunting parties or helping new settlers find their way, but he always came home, always to Sophia and their children, his true north. When Samuel was 7 and Emily was 3, Sophia found herself expecting again. This time she was older, more experienced, but also more tired. Wade worried, and she could not entirely blame him. But the pregnancy progressed smoothly, and in the spring of 1886, their second son was born, a tiny thing they named Daniel, who nevertheless had a cry that could wake the whole mountain. "We are outnumbered now," Wade said, cradling Daniel while Samuel and Emily crowded around to see their new brother. "You are outnumbered," Sophia corrected with a smile. "Emily and I make 2 girls. Samuel and you and Daniel make 3 boys. So really, we need 1 more girl to even things out." Wade's eyes widened. "One more? Woman, are you trying to kill me?" But he was smiling as he said it, and 2 years later, when their 4th and final child, a daughter named Rose, came squalling into the world, he welcomed her with the same fierce love he had given all their children. The years passed in the way of years, each day much like the one before, but the accumulation of them adding up to a life. Samuel grew tall and strong like his father, learning to track and hunt and survive in the mountains. Emily proved to have her mother's gift for healing and her father's steady hands. Daniel was the wild one, always climbing trees and bringing home injured animals for Sophia to nurse back to health. Rose, the baby, had both her parents wrapped around her tiny finger and knew it. Wade's hair began to show threads of silver, and lines appeared at the corners of Sophia's eyes, but to each other they were as beautiful as the day they had met. On quiet evenings, after the children were asleep, they would sit on the porch and remember. "Do you remember the first thing I said to you?" Wade asked one such evening. Sophia nestled against his side. "You said Jesus, I think." "Very eloquent," he laughed. "I meant the second thing. You told me not to move. Then you asked my name." "I was terrified," Wade admitted. "When I saw you in that trap, saw what my carelessness had done, I thought I was going to lose you before I ever had the chance to know you. But you did not lose me. You saved me." "We saved each other," he corrected. "I was just existing before you, going through the motions. You taught me how to live again." Sophia kissed him softly. "You taught me I could be brave, that I could build a life on my own terms." "Our terms," Wade said. "Always our terms." When Samuel turned 18, he surprised them by announcing he wanted to go east to study at a university, to learn engineering. Sophia's heart ached at the thought of him leaving, but Wade encouraged it, understanding the need to find your own path. Samuel went with their blessing and returned 3 years later with a degree and a wife, a smart young woman named Clara, who took to mountain life with surprising ease. They built their own cabin a mile down the valley, close enough to help but far enough for independence. Emily married a young doctor who had come west to practice, and together they opened a small clinic in Silver Ridge. She still came to her mother often for advice on herbal remedies, combining old knowledge with new medical understanding. Daniel became a forest ranger, protecting the wilderness he loved. Rose, the baby, was the one who surprised them all by becoming a teacher, eventually opening a small school in Silver Ridge, where she taught children from all the mining and ranching families. Wade and Sophia grew old together in their cabin in the mountains, surrounded by children and grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. Wade's hands became gnarled with age, but he still carved birds for each new baby born into the family. Sophia's hair turned white, but her eyes remained sharp, and she continued to tend her garden and make her medicines until the day she could not rise from her chair. It was Wade who found her one spring morning at the age of 73, sitting in her favorite spot overlooking her garden, her medicine book open on her lap. She had simply fallen asleep and not woken up, as peaceful a death as anyone could hope for. Wade held her for a long time, this woman who had walked into his bear trap and his heart 45 years before. And though he wept, there was gratitude in his grief. They had had so many years, so many beautiful years. He lived another 2 years after that, long enough to see Samuel's youngest grandson born, long enough to finish one last carving, a matched pair of wrens in flight that he left for the family. When his time came, he went in his sleep, in the bed where all their children had been born, in the cabin he had built with his own 2 hands. They were buried side by side on a hillside overlooking the mountains Wade had loved and the valley where their children and grandchildren still lived. The family gathered to remember them, to tell the story of how they had met, of the bear trap and the healing and the love that had grown from such an unlikely beginning. Samuel, gray-haired now himself, stood at his parents' graves with his own children and grandchildren around him. "My father once told me," he said, "that some things are worth the risk, that loving someone, building a life with them, even knowing you could lose them, was the bravest thing a person could do. He and my mother proved that every day of their lives together." Emily placed wildflowers on both graves, columbines like the ones Wade had brought Sophia in those early days. "They taught us that home is not a place but the people you love," she said. "That family is what you build through choice and commitment and showing up every day." Daniel, always the emotional one, could barely speak through his tears. "They loved us so much. They loved each other so much. How do you measure a life like that?" Rose, the youngest, had the answer. "You measure it in moments, in quiet evenings and loud dinners, in hands held and words spoken, in children raised and gardens planted, in the choice they made every single day to keep choosing each other. That is how you measure a life like theirs. That is how you measure love." The family lingered as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. The wind sighed through the pines, carrying the scent of wildflowers and earth and growing things. And in that moment, standing together on that hillside, the descendants of Wade Brennan and Sophia Grant felt their presence, felt the legacy of love they had left behind. The cabin still stood, maintained by the family as a reminder and a refuge. Inside, Wade's carvings lined the shelves, dozens of birds frozen in wood, each one a gift of love. Sophia's medicine book remained in the still room, its pages worn soft from use, still consulted by Emily and her daughter who had inherited the healing gift. The bed where 4 children had been born and 2 people had loved each other for over 4 decades was covered with the same furs, and sometimes grandchildren would sleep there when they visited, dreaming of the man and woman who had made this place a home. In the years that followed, the story of Wade and Sophia became a sort of legend in that part of Colorado. The mountain man and the city girl, the bear trap and the healing, the love that had grown against all odds and lasted a lifetime. Parents told it to their children, who told it to their children, passing down not just the facts, but the lesson contained within them. That sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best things. That kindness and care can heal more than physical wounds. That love, real love, is not about grand gestures, but about showing up day after day, choosing each other in 1,000 small ways. That home is something you build together, brick by brick, day by day, moment by moment, and in the cabin on the mountainside, in the garden that still bloomed each spring, in the faces of the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their blood and their legacy, Wade Brennan and Sophia Grant lived on, their love story woven into the very fabric of the mountains they had called home, eternal as the peaks themselves, enduring as the pines, infinite as the sky above. The metal teeth of that bear trap, long since rusted and discarded, had brought together two souls who needed each other, who would spend their lives proving that the most profound connections often begin with pain and healing, with vulnerability and care, with one person reaching out to help another in their moment of greatest need. And from that single act of kindness, from Wade freeing Sophia's leg and carrying her to safety, had grown a love that shaped generations, a testament to the transformative power of compassion and the enduring strength of two hearts beating as one. In the end, that is what love is. Not the absence of struggle, but the commitment to face it together. Not the avoidance of pain, but the willingness to heal each other's wounds. Not the fairy tale beginning, but the choice to write a beautiful story through all the days that follow, until the final page is turned and the book is closed, the ending as satisfying as it is inevitable, complete and full and right. Wade and Sophia Brennan had lived that truth, had embodied it in every choice they made, every hardship they endured, every joy they celebrated together. And their ending, peaceful and surrounded by love, was as perfect as any two people could hope for, the closing chapter of a story that began with a trap and a rescue, and became something neither of them could have imagined in those first terrifying, painful, transformative moments. Their great-great-granddaughter would one day stand in that same cabin, holding Wade's carved wren in her hands, and understand that she came from love, that her roots went deep into this mountain soil, nourished by the lives of two people who had found each other in the wilderness, and chosen, every single day, to build something lasting and true and beautiful. And she would carry that knowledge with her, that legacy of love, as she built her own life, made her own choices, found her own path through the wilderness of the world. Because that is what we leave behind. Not just children or possessions or achievements, but the example of how we loved, how we lived, how we faced our fears and embraced our joys. Wade and Sophia left behind a masterpiece in that regard, a love story for the ages, written not in words but in the lives they touched, the family they created, the home they built in the wild and beautiful mountains of Colorado Territory, where a bear trap had closed on a young woman's leg and opened both their hearts to the possibility of everything that came after.